it not always is like that. And I wanted to make that point when you said, oh my gosh, how much I grew with storytelling. Same here. But if you are not there yet, that doesn't mean that you are a bad teacher, right? If you try some storytelling and it didn't work for you, that doesn't mean that you're a bad teacher. We all are great teachers. We're just growing. And I believe that when we see ourselves as growing and learning, we are going to have more grace, and then we're going to allow ourselves to grow and to really learn and to reflect and have a different perspective. So, it really helps me when I have a bad day, or when I went and do like an activity that didn't work for me. I really can separate the bad activity, the bad day, the class that is not engaged with my value as a teacher. Like, finally, I can separate it. I know that I'm a great teacher because I care, because I try to improve myself, because I try to learn, because I try to have these conversations with you, because I love what I do. But that doesn't mean that my activities are great and my classes are perfect.
All the time. They are, Claudia, because I've seen them, but just
yes, but not all the time, right? So I think I wanted to start that, because sometimes when we try new things, we're always so concerned, because it's like everything at the beginning, it just doesn't, it's so smooth, right? Like when you first try like a cake, maybe you're gonna say, you know what, I should put more flour, or maybe I should put it, just maybe I should preheat it, and I didn't do that. So I think that is when your skills are gonna get better and better, is when you take that time to reflect. And that reflection is so much easier to do when it's not tied to our value as teachers.
Absolutely. I think that's beautiful. And I think it's a powerful reminder that our value is not defined by the level of engagement in our students. Yes, we should strive to keep them engaged, and we all do. We all want, what do we want?
Who wouldn't, right? Like, who wouldn't want that?
Who is just like, I really don't care. I don't know anybody like that. So we want that engagement, and we want that language acquisition to happen. And it is a journey. It is a journey, and we'll start somewhere, and we are going to evolve through that journey as long as we don't give up. And it's okay to take breaks, and it's okay to have setbacks, and it's okay, because setbacks are just another opportunity to reflect on how we can come back to it.
Yes, absolutely. And I think when we see that, we are gonna have, like, we're losing so many teachers. And I was reading these stats. I was reading these stats about stressful jobs. And of course, teaching is as stressful as being a nurse, and more stressful than being a doctor. So, and nurses are dealing with life and death, right? Like, they're dealing with a lot, and we're the same. So imagine the stress, and that takes a toll on our mental health, our physical health, and of course, and we're the pilots of our classes, right? So if we are not well, that is going to create an impact on students. So I really think that we are going to have to shake things up a little bit, and speak louder about who we are as teachers. And I think the evaluation systems, the instruments that are using to evaluate us, are really harsh. And I think the intention is great, but at the end, we are being like, oh, how many times do your kids engage? How many questions do they ask? What is the end of course exam? What is the results? And then we ended up being a number, right? Like, oh, you are, imagine if you as a teacher get score as need improvement. Like, what?
Especially in the last 2 years, 3 years now.
What? Like, imagine that. Imagine that you are need improvement. Like, what is that supposed to mean? Like, we all need improvement. We are in the business of improving ourselves. It's ongoing. Like, how? But our system says that. So I know, I wanted just to say that, because I feel like when we do these conversations about storytelling and what we're going to tackle today, Sometimes we can feel like a little bit apprehensive and say, oh my gosh, that's one more thing, and I'm not going to do it well.
Start this.
It is one, yes. And I want, if you're there listening to us, I just wanted just to like breathe, enjoy this conversation, have like an open mind, because this is good. I mean, this is what makes me go to school every day with a big smile. This gives me a lot of joy, and is how can we engage students with storytelling. I don't know you, Berta, but I discovered storytelling late. I've been teaching for so many years. I mean, I think I'm like around 16 or 17. I don't know. I don't want to count, because then I have to count my age. But it's long time. And I think for the first 7 or 8 years, I just didn't even know that it existed. But I think storytelling has been in language learning, in language classes for many years. I mean, we have TPRS, we have story listening, we have a story asking, we have stories have been used a lot in class, but we still need to use more. And I think I encounter stories and storytelling as the creation of these fictional stories, which I really enjoy, and my students enjoy. And I still do that because it's fun. But then I discover, yes, exactly. Then I discover that the nonfiction stories were the ones that my students will remember the most. And when I was telling nonfiction stories, I was doing two things. I was really supporting my students to build their language competence, and also I was cultivating cultural understanding and cultural competence. And that, I mean, that's huge.
Absolutely.
That is huge.
Yeah, I have to agree with that, Claudia. We have similar journeys. I've been teaching, I'm going on year 8 of like as a teacher, and being in the classroom. And I discovered TPRS thanks to my student teacher supervisor, Roman Turinsky, who is a good friend of mine. And he was going to trainings for TPRS at the time, and he told me about it. So I was his student teacher. I had the honor of being his student teacher, and he told me all about it. And then I saw what it was. I understood what it was. And then flash forward 3 years later, then I went to an actual training myself, and I saw that it was like, it seemed interesting to me, but it seemed like it was too complicated. And then they even had this like 10 steps or 8 steps. And honestly, like as a brand new teacher, or as a pretty new teacher, first 3 years, first 5 years teacher, or brand new to comprehensible input teacher, I mean, just any mix right there, it can be so overwhelming and be like, how am I going to do this? And then we overthink it, and then we don't do it. And then also later in 2016, that's when I really understood kind of how to do it a little bit better, how to do one-word images. So that's what I started with, one-word images and stories through one-word images. And I would say that in my experience, like I grasped the idea, I did it, I learned how to do it. I went back so happy to my classroom to do one-word images, and my students enjoyed it. But then after a while, it lost its magic. And I was wondering, I mean, my students are very compliant. They have always been. So, but compliant is not the same as engaged. And I wanted my learners to be engaged, involved, interested, genuinely interested, wanted to research more, wanted to get to know more. And you, Claudia, had taught me, you always said a phrase, and you have taught me so much. And one of those things is like, we can't not ask our students to respect and to fall in love and to appreciate. That's the word you use. They can't appreciate what they don't know. So if we are doing fiction stuff all the time, then where's the culture? Where's the strong cultural piece? That's just a question that I want to pose tonight. And again, there's nothing wrong if you're doing fiction with your students. And we don't mean, and by fiction, well, I don't mean like novels. I do novels that are fiction, but they still talk about culture. Yeah. They still have culture embedded in it.
Yeah.
But what I mean by like,
agree.
Yeah, but for example, and especially right now during pandemic, I know that for middle schoolers, fiction works very well. I would say this for middle schoolers that, you know, that they're still so young and they still appreciate all of that. For my high schoolers, definitely they want to talk about real topics, about real people. They want to be not entertained, but they want to be, I don't know what's the word I'm looking for, but they are like, invite me.
Engage.
Invite me to engage, invite me to explore more about the world. That's just the kind of learners that I have right now. And my students are not the perfect kiddos by any means. But they absolutely are, enjoy the class. And that's because of the stories. And I actually, this semester, Claudia, I did two of their stories. And thank you so much. Like I did my own units, but I used your products as my supplements, or sometimes as the driver of my lesson. So the first on January, I used your Martin Luther King story, because we talk about Martin Luther King, and then I expanded it to so much more. And maybe we can have a session later on that, Claudia, because that's a whole other topic.
We totally should.
And then the other one, I used the other resource recently, which is in your TPT store, I believe, right? This one on San Basilio de Palenque. Oh my God. Okay, it's like week 3 and we finished it, and now we're doing actually another idea from you and Heidi Trude, which is the one like make your school a museum. Right now my students are working on that piece, and it's been magical, and they're just so interested in doing their research. They're taking it so seriously. And I created a song unit that was perfect. It was perfect. It was like as if I had talked to you, but not really. I did a song unit that I'm gonna be releasing that's called Negrito by Herencia de Timbiqui. And so we listened to the song, and then there's another guy, and his name is Alex Kin, and he also has the version. And in the song, they talk about Martin Luther King, which we had already talked about. They talk about Malcolm. They talk about what is the correct pronunciation? Because I've heard Biojo and I heard Boyo.
Oh, I don't know.
I heard both.
I don't know, because, like Palenque, the language that they speak is just, they created that language for that little town. So it's like, I don't know, like, I don't know. We're going to have to ask. We should listen carefully to the video of the video that I shared at the end of the unit with where the person from Palenque is talking. And I'm going to go to Palenque. So my next trip to Cartagena, because it's a 90 minutes. So I'm gonna
take me with you.
You come with me, because last time, that was 2 years ago, I found out about San Basilio de Palenque with one person that I always go there, and I love to talk to her because she studied history and she's like a guide. And I always love to tell her in walking tours in Cartagena because the history. And she told me about that, but we didn't have space in the week, and I said, this is something that I have to do next year. That next year never happened because of COVID, and now we're here. But I love all the points that you make, because storytelling, it doesn't have to be, it can be whatever you want it to be, first of all. And I love when you talk about how kind of like it was hard for you to do the 10 steps and the circling, and I have to do X, because I'm like that. I cannot. Oh my gosh, Berta, I cannot put a piece of furniture together because I get by instruction number 3, I'm out. So I am like that. I am so much like you in that respect. But I just go and I'm me, and I'm looking at my students and make sure that they're with me and make sure that they're understanding. And then I just go and tell the story. And I tell the story the same way that my dad told me stories to me, and he would just change his voice, and he would pause, and he would look at me, and he would say something, and we're like, oh my gosh, and we would be afraid. And that is, and then
it's like, and it's just, I mean, this is a perfect example, because this is a session on what to use and how to engage with storytelling. And look at you and me, we're talking about your stories, and we have stories about the stories. You have stories about your stories with your students, and I have stories about my stories with my students. And that is just the power of the stories, that they connect people. And for me, it was so beautiful and totally unplanned, because honestly, I was not going to use San Basilio de Palenque unit, not because I was like, I'm not going to use it. I had seen it. But then when I saw the song, I was doing my song, and and in the lyrics it say, "Soy seguidor de Mandela, Martin Luther, and Biojo," and my students were like, "¿Quién es Biojo?" And it's like, okay, let me go get this unit out. And that was the best. It like connected. It came full circle.
I'm so happy to hear that. It makes me so happy. But you were saying something about connection. So I did a lot of research on storytelling because you know me, I wanted to know the why. I know that it was working in my class, but I wanted to know why. So I started looking at more. And one of the things that I found is that it's in our DNA, because oral transmission has been forever such important in humanity. And it was like how knowledge was transferred, it was through stories. So storytelling, or the structure of a story, is in our DNA. We understand how it works. So that is one benefit, because we don't need to tell that to our students, where students already know the story, how stories work. But second is something that you said. We are going to remember better stories because we are going to develop some emotions when we are listening to a story. But then those are going to become shared emotions. So those emotions are going to create a connection among your class because they're shared. And then I was thinking about how I connected with my cousins when we went to my farm in Santander, when my dad told us stories, and we were 5 or 6 cousins. Guess what? Today, 30 years later, we sit down in my living room and we remember how we felt, and those feelings connect us. And then I know why my kids, my students come back 2 years ago and they say, oh, and remember, and si se puede, señora, and Sor Juana, and they look at me and they remember the stories, and they remember the names, and they remember what happened. So they may not remember how to conjugate a verb. They may not, but they remember the stories, and because they are so involved in these stories, they start developing this cultural appreciation that is so much harder when you're just doing one day this little thing about, you know, this is what is happening and let's move on. But when those stories become the heart of your class,
and honestly,
it changes.
I think 2 things that you mentioned, and again, I don't want to overstep in the presentation, so stop me if like I'm going there. But 2 things that I have come to realize more and more, because I was aware of these in the past, but then you live it a little bit more. And as you mentioned, it creates that community. And later on, if for example, I know that once I put all of the work from my level 2 students all over my hallways, my level 3s are going to be like, oh, we did that. And they're going to say it with a smile, or they're going to say, and they're going to be able to, you know, just make another connection. And that's going to grow your program. And that's going to continue with that. And the other day I had a student who told me, said, this class feels different. She wasn't even talking about Spanish. She just says, feels different. It is so diverse and everybody talks to everybody.
Yeah.
And we don't have that in other classes.
Yeah.
That's what my students said. And that kind of saddened me a little bit, because I'm just like, how can we not have, but as world language teachers, and I know Norma is listening, and I know Esther is listening, and Madeline is listening, and I know that we have a lot of people here listening tonight. Nolan is listening. So I know that they work so hard as well to build those communities early on. This is not a storytelling. It's, of course, another tool to deliver input that is very powerful. And if you haven't tried it, we want to encourage you to consider it. But also, it is so much more than that. And if you have done it and you have failed, I just want to invite you to think about, why do you think you have it not you haven't failed, but the act of storytelling has not worked in your classroom. Maybe consider, is it the story that I brought, maybe my high schoolers, and we both teach high school. So like I said, I know that in middle school, fictional works very well. One word images are amazing for middle school, but for high school, especially if you teach level 2, level 3, that they're a little bit more mature, especially in a pandemic, they want to learn about real things. They are not into the silliness. They're not into whatever story we can cook up last minute. They want to talk about these topics. It was so interesting to them to know that there was a free city in the 15th century in the Americas. They never heard of that. They're like, what?
Never.
Learn about this.
And what about that they created this language? They still speak. Yes. They still speak the language today.
And why they created the language.
And why they created the language. And how they couldn't say, oh, we're going to talk about this language from Ethiopia, because they came from different places. And it's the diaspora, right? Like they were dispersed everywhere, and they didn't have any identity in terms of language. I mean, imagine that. And then they create, oh my gosh, it is incredible. Don't you love it? Like, you love it. It's like, oh my gosh.
That's the thing. We want to invite you to not just tell a story, but live the story and live it with your students in full presence. Let me tell you, Claudia and I share about this, and I don't want to like get on a tangent, but as you know, and I have shared with my community and the people in my email, I've just recovered from having 8 months of chronic anxiety. And I am just happy to say that I am totally free from it. I'm on week 3 of being free from it, and it's been amazing. But I will say this: it's now that I'm not taking medication anymore. Now that I am feeling free from that, I want to be fully present with my students. I don't care if my grades are not done. I don't care if I'm behind, and that's a good lesson. Like I learned to take good care of myself, and I learned to stop caring about things that do not matter as much. And I learned how to put little things aside. So I think when we're telling stories, sometimes we want to rush through the story, or we want to rush through the unit, and that is only going to hurt our learners. I feel terrible in a way that we spent like 4 or 5 weeks on Martin Luther King, but you know what? That's what they needed. That's how much time they needed. And they feel so empowered, and they all completed their assessment. And now we're here on this other unit, and here we are another couple of weeks. And I wanted to cut it last week because I was like, man, I already had my units for Valentine's to talk about self-love, to talk about different types of love and appreciation. I had all of that lined up, but I'm like, no, I'm not going to cut this unit to talk about this. And I'm like, if I want to, I'll put it in there later. And if not, I'll move on to the next thing. And I would say this, and I told you this already, Claudia, but since I've been a member of your academy, it's, for me, it's like, I already knew what I was going to teach throughout the semester, but now it's like, I have so much to teach, because if I'm thinking something, it's like, oh, Claudia has another resource I can integrate. And now it's like, I don't have to,
I guess that's a good problem to have.
It's like, I need more time with these kids. Can I have 1 more month with them so we can do a couple more units?
I mean, I think it's just, you can see, right? Like, it's exciting. One more thing that I was going to talk about storytelling with non-fictional stories is how much more competent I have become culturally. So, and I'm going to tell you this, and this happened to me at the beginning of my career. I never taught Dia de Muertos. I never thought that was a big thing. I didn't understand Dia de Muertos. I didn't get Dia de Muertos. I never did Dia de Muertos until I start learning about Dia de Muertos. And the more I learn, the more amazed I am of all the true meaning behind Dia de Muertos. And I think that is one of the biggest growth that I have done in my personal life as a Colombian, as a Latina, as an Hispana, is how much more I have learned about my own culture and how much more appreciation I have developed. And that it is something that happened in my classes. Like, I think when we're teaching in the United States, a lot of our kids don't see learning Spanish or understanding the culture as an asset for them, because at the end they feel everybody wants to learn English because English is the predominant language. It's not the most spoken, but it's the most useful language. And we all have all this knowledge and we all have all this, and they're learning from us. When I'm telling these stories, when I'm talking about Renata Flores, when I'm talking about Rebecca Leng, when I'm talking about San Basilio de Palenque, when I'm talking about Goyo, when I'm talking about Dia de Muertos, when I'm talking about Lorena, when I'm talking about all these people, things, events, product, practices that are coming from our culture, our countries, then my student, for the first time, feel they're learning from us, right? So it's like you're really switching it's a transformational for me. Absolutely. Because my students are like, I just finished, I'm working on a unit for my level 3, are related to food. And I'm telling the story of Abigail Mendoza, which is a Zapoteca chef. And she uses the metate and she uses all these traditions to cook. And she doesn't like to use blenders because she believes that the speed of the blender burns the flavor of the food. And she uses the metate, and then she uses the metate when she has to nail down to mole, the seeds and the corn and all the things. And she said that is very important to her because that contact with the earth is a way to be thankful to the earth that is feeding us. And then after I said that, I pause and I look at them and I tell them in Spanish, and we go to McDonald's. I mean, we are like forgetting the most essential.
Bacteria itself doesn't eat McDonald's.
Oh,
I want to invite you to try that. Leave a McDonald's burger out and see how over days it's just going to get hard.
So look at that. Look at this person in Oaxaca that is nailing down to grind the corn in a way to like respect the earth and have value for the food that is feeding us. And my students like, oh my gosh.
Okay. And there's a difference, Claudia. I mean, I want to say this, and I want to challenge people who are listening today. Okay, I'm feeling a little bit bold tonight. So I want to challenge, because I want it to be challenged like this. How do we present stories to our classroom? So first what are we talking about in the classroom? Number one, are we talking about things that matter to our students? Are we talking about the culture? Because we are the cultural connectors. So many times comprehensible input is just linked to, sometimes it gets a bad rep because there's not enough culture being taught with comprehensible input, but you can teach heavy cultural concepts with CI all the way from level 1 to AP, like totally done. And I would say one more thing. So what are we teaching them? How are we delivering? Are we fully present as teachers when we are doing our delivery? And then the other thing that you just mentioned leads me to think I know that we do it with so much respect as world language teachers, because you said you had to learn so much about Dia de los Muertos. I learned so much about San Basilio de Palenque. Like, I want to go to Colombia. Like, you got to take me with you. I'm sorry. You should not have said that to me. But I presented it with such respect. Mm-hmm. And then, and I'm pretty sure when you talk about Dia de los Muertos, you presented it with as much respect as you could give to the topic. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Because we can't, this is not a topic that we're just like, oh, here's a slide, here's the cute pictures, and then here are the sweet 16 verbs, and then we do some Q&A questions. It's not like that, because
and a Kahoot and bye-bye.
Right? And now there's nothing wrong with doing Kahoots. There's nothing wrong
love
with
it.
Q&A. However, if we just leave it at that, we're just like scratching the surface, and we're not inviting the students to go deep with us on a journey of like cultural understanding and, you know, just cultural connections and building that empathy for humanity in general, which is what we
Absolutely,
wanted to
absolutely. And I think it's transformational. Like I just really, and I'm not making it bigger than it is, because it is. Like I feel it in my classes. Now, do all my students feel like amazed like me? No, maybe not, but a lot of them. But a lot of them feel like that. And then I'm gonna come back and tell you something. When we know that the general requirements for teaching world languages are 2 years, and I'm going to ask you, in 2 years, even if we, you know, we just do all the things, we check, and we do everything, what is going to be the language proficiency that our students are going to gain after 2 years? Maybe if we have like a strong student, is going to go to intermediate low. Maybe, you know, everyone is going to go. But the general student is going to end up as a novice high. After 2 years of high school, that's it, novice high. So that means that he's going to be, or she's going to be able to memorize phrases, simple sentences, basic information, just like basic needs. That's great. Okay, that's a lot. That's great. But what about cultural competence? The problem is that we spend 2 years teaching, right? Teaching AR, ER, IR verbs, stem changing verbs, reflexive verbs, and teaching vocab for the house and toilet and sink and bed and nightstand and lamp and rug and stairs and elevator and first floor and roof. And if that is what we are focusing on,
disconnected vocabulary,
and then we don't leave space, and we don't leave space for this. So my thinking is, if we're doing that, we are losing the opportunity to not only help and give students the gift of language, even if it's a little bit, but the great, amazing gift of developing cultural understanding and respect. When they don't see, like, you know, Mexicans are hats and maracas, and Colombians are a bunch of drug dealers, and in Bolivia, who knows who lived there, because nobody talks about a Bolivia, and the conquistadores are the Spaniards, and boom, and maybe Shakira dances pretty, and Jennifer Lopez, and then Selena, and that's it. So if we are spending 2 years with our students, and we get them to novice high, and we don't get them a space to do this conversation, we are losing an opportunity. I feel like as cultural ambassadors of the languages, because even if you are not from Colombia, even if you're not from a Spanish-speaking country or a French-speaking country or a German-speaking country, you love the language that you teach. I mean, you love the language you teach. You know a ton of the language you teach. Do you know it all? No. Do I know it all? No, absolutely not. I've learned so much. So the invitation is to explore that and give you that space. So you focus less in the 68 words of the family unit, where they teach you how to do, I don't know what else they put there, because I stopped looking at it. Or the 25 activities about extracurriculum activities. And if we start talking about great stories, and that drives our language, and that drives our activities, then the rest is going to come much easier. And your students are going to be engaged because they're going to be learning. They're not going to be listening to you because they want to understand how to conjugate in the subjunctive mode. They're going to be listening to you because they want to find out what happened and how San Basilio de Palenque became the first free town in Americas, or why Renata Flores is singing in Quechua, or why, you know, all these great stories. And oh my gosh, I get so excited. Don't you? It's if we can that, I think,
and I think
our language programs will be so big, so big.
Right, absolutely. And I know I get super excited too and I did not write the story. I was just excited that I found it and that I connected it with one of the song resources I created, and it fit right in. And my students, before I brought it, it was like, okay, we know who MLK is, we know who Malcolm is, but who's this other guy? Like, we knew what, I mean, and we knew what the theme of the song was, the main idea of the song was, and we knew that this other guy had to do with this. And I was like, okay, I have the perfect unit for this. And it was like magic, Claudia. It was like magic. We're still talking about it.
I believe you. I believe you. I mean, I believe you because I've seen that. I've seen that in my class so many times. And you know, one question that I get, because we said that we're going to do burning question, we're going to be devil's advocate, because we know that this is so much easier saying than done, right? Like we say it because we have been done it. We have had our stories that have been a disaster. We have had our activities that have a disaster. But I think you and I have developed that understanding that is not the storytelling, is not us as teachers. Something didn't work, and we just have developed that, I don't know, like skill to reflect and say, okay, let me see what happened in that story. Why didn't work? But one of the things that I get asked a lot is, okay, what about your curriculum? Because I still need an end of course exam. My students have an end of course exam where they have to conjugate a verb, where they like it or not. And I think we need to be practical. I think you need to teach it, right? Like if your students, if your evaluation is dependent on that your students know how to conjugate AR verbs, we're going to have to do it. Can you do it through stories? Absolutely. Because the way that you tell story is up to you. The language that you use to tell a story is up to you. And I want you to think about this. I want you to just do the exercise. I want you to think about a great story. How would you tell the stories to a 2-year-old kid? How would you tell that story to a teenager? How would you tell that story to a college kid? And when you think about that, then you discover that you and I and Berta have a superpower. And the superpower is that we can build the bridge, that our language can adjust to the needs of your students. No my students, no Berta's student. And I think the story that we have said in the past, Berta, is it makes this visual. Berta and I did a lab with my students in FFLA back in October. And Berta and I were planning our lesson. And we were talking about this idea that we wanted. And we look at this video that I really like and Berta really liked, and we thought that it was perfect for the time. And we say, we're going to do this song, and this is what we're going to do. And then Berta developed great resources for the song because that's her thing and she loves it. And it was La Reunión, and she has it in TPT. It was amazing. And we said, and Berta and I sat down and said, okay, so let's look at these slides. And I say, no, Berta, they don't know that word. No, Berta, I think we need to gloss that because they don't know going to know that. Oh, I think we need to add that. No, let's change that sentence because they're not going to get that. We need to make it like this way. We need to make it like this way. We need to. Why? Because I know my students. Now, it doesn't matter that level 3, level 4, level 5. Those numbers don't say anything. Don't say anything. They are where they are. And if we just kind of let it go and say, okay, this is my level 3 class. They say Spanish 3, and my Spanish 3 is a novice high Spanish 3. It's okay. It's okay, because if we do that, when we come, we are going to stay comprehensible. And when Berta and I did that, then we delivered the lesson, and it was a success. It was a success. Why? Because we took the time to adjust the language. Why? Because I knew where they were. Now, Berta was teaching Spanish 3. I was teaching a Spanish 3. That was for a level 3, but the language was different because my students are not Berta's students.
Yeah, and we had just finished a different unit, and they had, like, I remember exactly which words they were, and that's why I had those words in my head, because I was planning after having finished this other unit, and I know my students had that particular language. So, and that's why it was the magic. Like, I was planning with my students in mind at that level precisely, but Claudia's students are also amazing. And I'm sure if she would have created a resource for me at the time, I would have had to change the language to fit my students, because maybe they were not familiar with some of the words Claudia selected to use. That's why no resource is perfect out there.
No, absolutely, absolutely. There is nothing that is gonna meet the needs of your students but you. But you have the superpower. You can get any resource and make it fit your students. So when I get asked, how can you cover all my curriculum? Adjust your language. I'll adjust. If there are some structures that are really important in your curriculum and they're being covered in the end, be intentional. I don't like to target grammar in my class, but sometimes I have to, because they have to take an end of course exam. So sometimes I change my language to target the structures that I want my students to be exposed. And then we talk about it and we read about it. And then at the end, we say, oh, and look at that. You know why? Because of this. And then you do a 10 minutes pop-up grammar. And if they need more, then you do more. But it's also related to some message that they're doing. And it's going to make so much more sense for them than just bringing a lesson grammar out of the blue. So tying your grammar requirements to stories is great. But this is something that I don't want you to do. Please don't do it. Please, please, please. I mean, don't do it. Don't come and say, I need to teach AR verbs. What story can I use to teach AR verbs? Because when we approach our lessons like that, it's not going to be that engaging. So my way to do it is, this is a story. What language do I want to teach this story? But my story drive my lessons. My story is the heart, is the engine, and their words are the door, the windows, it goes all together. But when you have a great story, you can accommodate the language to that story. And that is how I'm able, like Berta said, I teach AP like this, I teach Spanish 3 IB like this, I teach my level 1 like this, I teach all my classes through great stories.
Yeah, and you do an amazing job coming up with them. I mean, I'm just always mesmerized with the stories that you create. And every single story I have used from your stories has saved me so much time. And the other powerful thing about it, Claudia, is that you can use, I did your MLK story, your Martin Luther King stories with my level 2s, and I'm about to start that same unit with AP in the heroes section, and highlighting heroes, and we're going to compare and contrast with your Cesar Chavez unit. So I mean, it's just so much that you can do, and I know that if I don't watch it, I can be on that for 2 whole months. We're not going to do that, but I really could.
I know. That's what happened to me. I'm saying, just don't overdo it. But I think one of my favorite things to do, I'm going to tell you what I don't like to do. I don't like to do grading. I really don't like to do grading. I don't like to do assessments. I don't enjoy assessments. But my favorite part of teaching is creating lessons and delivering lessons. Like, those are my parts. Like, if you ask me, what would you spend all your time? I just don't like to do the whole thing. I don't like to do the paperwork. I don't like to do the grading. I don't like to do the organization. I hate to put my assignments in my LMS. Oh my gosh, I just don't like that. I don't like that. But if you ask me what do you like the most, is telling the stories. And after I tell the stories, like, okay, so whatever happened, like, we got the story. Like, now it doesn't matter, because I just really feel like that is what my students get transformed, and they develop a passion and a love for Spanish. And something that I know that is working is because I never had so many students minor and majoring in Spanish, like majoring in Spanish, like that's huge. So I have a student who is wanted to become a Spanish teacher. I mean, isn't that amazing? She wanted to become a Spanish teacher, and she went to UF, and she was between being a pharmacist or being a Spanish teacher. And then she came back to me and said, you know what? I know I would make much less money, but I just love it. And I say, and you're going to do great, and you're going to love it. So I think that is that is why I teach the way that I teach. But I wanted to do an invitation, Berta, because related to this, and you mentioned it, what you're going to do with the Martin Luther King unit. You are going to take the unit that you just taught in Spanish 2, and you're going to go ahead, turn around, and use it for AP. And I want to talk about that. And I have had many friends, Eunice included, that have said, I cannot keep doing this. I cannot come out with one idea, one story, one lesson for every single one of my preps. And you're lucky and I'm lucky too, because you have 2 preps. I have 3, but I consider myself lucky because I've been teaching the same 3 for many, many years. But there's so many teachers that have 4, 5, that they have in one class co-seated classes. And what a challenge to come out with lessons for each one of your preps. So after listening to all this, like really stressed teacher, you know what? I was looking at this, that I love to look stats. In average, a teacher spends 7 hours per week looking for instructional resources. And in average, a teacher has 40 minutes of planning per day. Do the math. They don't match up, because we're not talking about grading. We're not talking about, just taking attendance. We're not talking about responding to parents for emails. We're not talking about nothing. So you have 40 minutes, right? 40 minutes per day for planning. And in average, teachers spend 7 hours looking for resources. So we need to change that.
Not sustainable.
That is not sustainable. That is causing an amount of stress that is huge. So I decided to create this masterclass, how to plan one lesson for all your levels, how to really create that story of Martin Luther King and bring it to your level 1, your level 2, your level 3, and your AP. How to take that San Basilio and Palenque unit and put it in level 1, level 2, level 3, and AP. How can we become more effective and efficient in lesson planning while we still create a great impact, right? Because we still are going to have a huge impact, but it's not going to be on the expense of your time or your mental health or your level of stress. So we really need to let it be easy. We really need to make that change. And I know it's hard because I didn't do it. It took me forever to get where I am, where I feel comfortable, where I feel like just really well prepared, really strong about bringing one lesson for all my classes. And it works. It works. It has worked for me. It works for Berta. I know many teachers that works. And it's so much simpler than you think. It is so much simpler. So I want to invite all the teachers who are watching us today. It's going to be Sunday, February the 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. And you can sign up at growingwithproficiency.com/less is more. Because really, less is more in 2022. So I want to invite you, sign up. I would
say the link again, Claudia, please.
I'm putting the link right now. I'm doing, yeah, I think I can. Let me. Oh my goodness. Yeah. I don't know. Okay.
It's okay. It's okay.
I'm trying. I'm trying. Hold on.
We do have one question that we may be able to address maybe a little bit before we leave. There is one question in the chat that I would like to address, if that's okay with you, Claudia.
Yes, of course.
Once you put the link, let me know, because I don't want to mess up your train of thought. It is late, and I know my brain was totally lagging earlier. So I couldn't open the door of my house and talk at the same time. How about that?
Okay, I think it works. Okay, hold on. Let's see. Huh? I don't know what happened.
What is it? Can you tell me and I'll type it?
growing with proficiency. Okay.
Growing with proficiency, slash, less is more?
Growing with proficiency.com/.
And then
less is more.
Okay, yeah, let me see if I got it. I have the right one. Yes, I do. I'm gonna drop it in the chat. I'm gonna drop the link in the chat. So while I drop the link in the chat for everybody, it's a master class you do not want to miss. Claudia is pretty amazing. And I say this as one of the members of her academy, as I'm one of the founding members. And although I have presented a lot with Claudia, I told her, because when she first launched the academy, I said, Claudia, can I sign up? And she's like, why are you going to sign up? I'm like, well, because I have so much more to learn from you. And I honestly have learned so much from presenting with Claudia, from having side conversations with Claudia. And just, it's been a journey. And I'm just like, even though I don't go to most of the live sessions, I catch some of the recordings. And I learned so much from her resources as well. So definitely don't miss the live. I just posted it on the chat. You did too. You posted the link on the chat too, Claudia.
Oh, I did. Okay, so I thought I did, but you know me, like it's very busy.
But the question that we have right here comes from Norma. Norma says, what are some post activities lessons that you do after storytelling?
Okay, so I do a lot, and it depends, and that's one of the things that I'm going to be talking on Sunday in our live session, but I'm going to just tell you a little bit. I think, first of all, I do a variety. I think having a variety of questions, depending on the level of the class, is what just makes it happen. But I do, like, let's say that we are in my level one. In my level one, I read, in all my classes, as soon as I finish my storytelling, I write the story with my students. There are some few times that I don't get to do that, and I type it, but I rather write it with them. If I have the time, if I have the space, I write it with them because it makes it even better. It's going to be more comprehensible. So after we type it, this is something that I do. I have my students, I create for the next day. It's usually at the end of the day. So the next class, we're going to start with a little paragraph from the story where I include false information. And I ask my students, underline the false information from the text. Now, for my upper levels, I can say this is true or false and find evidence in the text. That's an IB question. IB has this type of question where it says true or false and justify. Now, if we're talking about more upper level stories, like for AP, I usually find a resource that is relatable to my story. And because most of my stories are nonfiction, I will always find a resource, and I'll bring the resource to the class. And something that I really like to do with my AP is read the resource, the article or the blog post, or maybe listen to the video, the audio, if we're there yet, because listening to authentic resources is another thing. But then I like to do this, Norma. I like to find in my upper levels, if they're ready, I want to make sure I give them the authentic resource, and I said, what is included in the authentic resource that I didn't include in the original story? And that is super powerful because it gives my students intention, and also it differentiates itself. Why? Because Berta may find just one thing, but then Norma might find 5, and Madeleine may find 10, and then Esther may find 3. So it really doesn't matter. Just find something. So see, it just depends. But anything that is gonna, what the idea is, anything that is gonna have your students go back to the reading. Something that I'm doing in the lower levels, as well in the upper levels, but I started doing it with the lower levels, is after they finish the story, I have a TA, and I take a picture of the story that we wrote together, and we type. She types it for me, and then I print it out, and I have my students read in silence the story again and do a sketch noting. So basically, I want them to read paragraph by paragraph, stop, and do a sketch. And it has worked really well in my class. So you know, when you have upper levels, they can do also annotations, but the annotations are going to look different depending on the level of the class. Now, something I'm going to be telling all this on Sunday, but this is like a preview. Now, also, when you're talking about that, notice this. You tell the story, right? You write the story with your class. The story that you're going to write with your level 1 is going to look very different than the story that you're going to write with your level 3. So right there, you're going to have 2 different stories. So even if the annotation, so tell me if this is wrong. So if the annotation, for example, for level 1 is do a sketch noting, 1 sketch per paragraph to identify the main idea. What are they talking about in that paragraph? And then in your level 3, you're going to say do a sketch noting and underline the 3 key words of the paragraph that are gonna kind of like tell you the main idea, right? So it's the same. I mean, like, is that slightly different? You can say underline in yellow the main idea of the paragraph and in green details. Why? Because in upper levels we want to really work on main idea and details because they're not the same. They're not the same, and some students struggle with that. So but you have the same story, so the level of questioning is going to change a little bit, but also the text itself is going to be different. And that is what I'm going to be talking on Sunday, is how much, if we know that, we are going to save so much time. I know Berta does this and I do this. A lot of my activities after reading, I plan 1 or 2, but a lot come on the spot. Like I have a class. I just cannot. I have 3
that's what happened to me with your Martin Luther King story. You had the pre-reading activity, you had 2 post-reading activities or so, and then you had 1 more activity. And I decided, I was like, oh, as I am doing the storytelling, I'm not going to have them do the pre-reading. I'm going to do storytelling, and I'm going to do they're going to do listen and draw before the storytelling to make connection with the story. After they answer the questions like, do you know this? Do you know who his wife was? What do you know about him and all of that? Which is kind of like a pre-assessment, right? And then after that, we did your second story, which is find the errors. But I also played games, very kinesthetic games. And then I also had the heads up with the target vocabulary. And I added so many other activities that came on the spot because they're activities I had done before. But definitely, those are the best kind of activities, the ones that
I agree. And then you know, right, like this is something like, how many days do you stay in the story? It just depends. It just really depends. So I can tell you I stay 3 days, but I really don't know, because it depends on your class. Some classes are going to love the story and they're going to want to stay longer. Some classes are going to need the input more. So they're going to have to read, and we're going to have to do more activities, and they're engaged with the class. And if not, then we just say bye-bye and we move on. So what I do is I do like Martin Luther King or San Basilio. I have done 1, 2, or maybe 3. But when I'm teaching the class, that grows. And why it grows? Because my students are interested enough, because I start making adjustments. But my basic is I asked them before to make some connections. What do you know about this? Then we go with the story. Then I do input-based activities based on the story. We write it, we read it, we listening, and then we do some type of supported output if we feel like we could, like that is, and that's it. But then when I'm teaching the story in my class at each level is going to develop different. And that is what I'm going to be talking on Sunday, is how you can be intentional, what you need to think to really help you develop that system.
We have a question about Sundays, about the class.
Yes.
Is it going to be, are the people who register for it, if they can't attend, are they going to receive a temporary recording?
Yes, they're going to receive a temporary recording, and the recording is going to be available for a week. So if you are not going to make it, just make sure that on Monday night, you open my email, because in that email, on Monday, if you register, you're gonna find the link for the replay.
Okay, well, thank you. Yeah, that was the other question that was pending. So
Okay.
I am so glad, Claudia, that we were able to make it happen. I am back at doing Facebook Lives in here, so I have lots of surprises coming up. And again, I may not do as many, and I may not do them always announced. That's just the way I operate, and it's okay. So
it's absolutely okay, Berta. I'm so glad to see you where you are. I am so proud of you. You have taught me so much about, the prior. I think you made a comment that really hit home to me, like back in December when we had a live with Meredith White, and then you said something about, we usually tend to put our family and the people that we love in the back seat, and maybe not even in the back seat, but in the how you call the baul, how you call that in English?
The trunk.
The trunk. So sometimes not even in the back seat, but in the trunk. And then you said, but they really deserve to be in the front seat. And I remember that you were talking, and you kind of like got very emotional about spending more time with your son and really treasuring him and spending time taking him to soccer and supporting him in his school, and taking time to spend with your mom and with your sisters, and flying to see your husband. And I thought that was just so important. And then that was in December. And then one day I was, of course, working on my lessons, and because I just love what I do. And then I remember that I was going to travel, and then, but it was a beautiful day. And I was like, Berta's right. And I went and I took some food for my parents. And oh my gosh, I'm gonna get emotional. And I remember being with my dad, and that was the last time that I was with him. And it took the time. I took the time. I decided to put my computer back and go and get some food and sit on the deck. And I remember that I was writing San Basilio de Palenque. And he asked me, like, what are you working on? And I said, this story, did you know that? And we spent like 2.5 hours on my deck talking about that. And it's just, and I remember thinking about what you said about putting your son in the front seat, because those moments cannot
because our families deserve to be. Yes. And
so
and totally, you know what, Claudia, I mean, I'm so glad that you had that opportunity and and you decided to take that moment.
I decided because, I remember I was here and it was sunny, and my dad hated the cold, hated the cold. But that day was sunny and was warm. And I said, you know what? I'm going to pick up some food, and we're going to sit on the deck, and we're going to have a great time. And it's not going to be rushed. I will do it. And, it just comes back to really loving what we do, but always putting
the boundaries.
And I'm not good at it. I'm really not good at it.
You're working on it.
I'm working on it, and you have been a great example. So thank you for that, Berta. Thank you for being such a great supporter, friend.
Likewise, you have taught me so much.
It's been a great journey, and I'm so glad that we're here today and that we can share and we can be back. And you are gonna just, whatever, right? But with a different perspective, really. A lot of reflection, and you're here, and thank you for everything that you do for your community, for all the teachers, for us. You are amazing, and congratulations on Scout.
Oh, thank you. I'm so excited about that, because yes, I look forward to connecting with some of the amazing people who are part of the board, and I just want to thank everyone who voted for me. Thank you for believing in me, because you guys know I have not been as stable in the past, but you know why, the reason why. But I am good. I am back. I am blessed, and I am ready to keep moving. So
good.
Everybody have a wonderful evening. Please sign up. Yeah, Claudia, sign up for Claudia's masterclass. You are absolutely not gonna regret it. Time spent with Claudia is time very well spent. So
Thank you,
I
friend.
know this has been helpful to me, even in the conversation, the reflection. To me, it's a reflective piece every time I talk to Claudia. And then, you know, it's like sharing it with you, our audience, is even that much more amazing because,
It
you know,
is.
nobody has it together. Nobody is perfect, but you know, Claudia having the experience that she has, she can walk us through so many other sides of the teaching, because teaching has so many sides, it's multifaceted. And I absolutely love that, and I appreciate that so much. So
Thank you.
have a great evening, everybody. We are going to disconnect now. So take so much care. Bye.
Bye. Thank you. Oh, Berta, gracias.
De nada, de nada. Ya, déjame, pongo la stop recording.